All right, good morning, everyone. Trying to see if you guys can see me. I guess you can. Most of what we'll do today from the Zoom is going to be, I'll be just sharing my screen. So I'm using a little bit different computer, so I've got a different camera going, so you're not able to see me as close up, which is probably a good thing. So I invited you guys to be able to come and attend in class, and I have one person here with me. So Aaron's here. Which is awesome. So, hey, that's great. When you feel comfortable and you're ready to come in and attend the classes live, just know you're welcome to do that. So we've got it spaced to where we could fit 12 people in here and still keep our social distance. So although Aaron's sitting in the splash zone, so, you know, if I get too animated, I might spit on you or something. All right. Well, so here's what we're going to do. So today starts the 12-hour New Agent course. And as part of this 12-hour New Agent course, typically you have to be live in person in order for me to give you CE credit from the division. But with everything that's going on, they have allowed me through the end of June to teach the classes and still give CE credit. So, but with that being said, those that are on Zoom, there are some requirements for this. So in order for me to give you credit for the class, I have to, throughout the class, ask you to put something in the chat box. So we'll just see whatever I come up with at the time. And you have to type it in the chat box within so many minutes, a couple of minutes of me saying it. And if you don't, then basically what they're saying is that you weren't paying attention and I can't give you credit for having attended the class. So if you're at home watching on Zoom, make sure you're paying attention because otherwise you'll have to retake this class again. So apparently, though, since Aaron's here, he could not pay attention the whole time, and you're good. You'll get credit still. All right. So I do, because I've got the computer off to the side here, and I see a few people saying good morning. So, yeah, awesome. I do have it to where you can unmute yourself. I'll try to keep an eye a little bit on the chat box, but for the most part, probably is going to be easier if you just unmute yourself as we go through it. So for Aaron here, I'm going to have him sign in on the sign-in sheet. So for you guys that are on Zoom, here's your first chance to show that you're paying attention is here's what I want you to do is put your first and last name in the chat box. And the idea of this being is so that once I'm done with the class, I will be able to get your show that you attended. So I'll probably have you do that a few times throughout. So put first and last name there. The other thing that I need you to do, and you don't have to necessarily do it today, but at least one of the times for the class as we do this, because basically how this works with the 12-hour New Agent is there are 6 classes that you have to attend. And of those 6, you have to attend all of them in order for me to give you credit. Now, I need your license number at least one time out of those 6 classes. So if you don't have it handy with you right now, no worries. Don't worry about it. If you do, put that in the chat box there as well so that I've got your license number and your name so that I can show you attended, and I've got your license number so I can give you the CE credit. So, all right. Any questions on anything before we get started? So I'll wait for either unmute or if Aaron has any. So, all right. In fact, here's the cool thing. I think the last class we did of this before, like, we'd all shut down, or even probably when we first shut down, you were the only one in here. So it's kind of cool. You're going to be the bookends. All right, so here we go. I'm going to get this. Go ahead.
Russ, this is Matt. Is the class an hour today or 2 hours?
Oh, great question. So the way that it works for these CE classes is they allow for a 10-minute break for every hour. So technically, we have to go an hour and 40 minutes. So we'll probably be about an hour and 40 minutes. Does that work?
Yeah, I have an appointment at 11. So I guess, anyways, just let
Well, so what I would say for you then, Matt, is just stay until 11, and then just what you'll have to do is just the next time I teach the class, you'll have to take it. So I keep a spreadsheet to where I will know who's been in the classes. And once you have attended all 6 of them, then is when I give you the 12-hour New Agent credit. So if for some reason, thanks for bringing it up, because if for some reason anybody that's on here ends up having to miss one for some reason, although I don't know what excuse most people would have, just kidding. But If you do have to miss one, you can just catch it the next go around. I keep it on the spreadsheet and then I'll give you credit. So I guess for you, Matt, either bail right now if you want, or you can stay till 11 to get as much information as we can do, but then you probably will have to redo this one.
No problem.
All right, cool. All right, so anyway, it looks like we may have had another person or two join, which for the first 10 minutes is okay. So just again, if you did join and you have not put your first and last name in the chat box, do that along with your license number so that I know that you're here. Okay, now I'm going to share the screen. So I'm going to pull up here. So for typically what I would do if you were here with me is I would give you a copy of this. And if you want me to send you one after, I can do that. But let me get this screen shared up here. Hopefully you can see that all pretty good. And I'm going to give to Aaron here a copy of one of these. And so here's what we're going to do is the idea of today is this, is we are going to go through and we're going to talk about the paperwork that you fill out when working with a seller. And specifically, we're mostly going to be spending most of the time on this listing agreement. And so for me, here's the idea. I remember as a brand new agent that my first listing that I ever went on, what happened was this, is I had been out door knocking with an agent and I knocked on somebody's door and I asked them when they planned on moving and they said as soon as possible. And I was like, what? That's like, wasn't expecting that. But anyway, I remember I went out on my first listing appointment and I had not even really looked at this paperwork. I went to my manager and just said, hey, I got this listing opportunity. Tell me what to do. He gave me the paperwork and just said, go have them sign all of this stuff. So I went out there really pretty blind and cold as to what I was doing. So here's my objective. Because of that, my objective for you guys is I want you to at least have an understanding of the contract and what it says and what it means and all those kinds of things. So typically what I do with a seller or a buyer even for that matter, but I will take this paperwork and I will say to them, okay, we have basically three options with this. Is the first option is you can, as the seller, or like I say, if I was working with a buyer, could go through and read this entire document and then let me know if you have questions. Or number two, I can go through and explain to you what each of the sections says. Or number three, you could just sign it. Now, which of those would you guess that most people choose? Yeah, well, actually, surprisingly, so Aaron said that they just signed it. Surprisingly, what I found actually is that's probably number two that happens. The number one most thing is just tell me what I'm signing, is what usually I get. So here's what I'm going to do with you guys is essentially I'm going to take you through it and explain it to you the way I would be explaining it to a seller, because that's what I found. Because obviously, if they want to read through the whole thing, which is it's fine if they want to do that, but part of what I want to know if that's going to be the case is my preference is to send this to them before I go out to meet with them, so that what happens is that I know that because I've sent it to them early, they've had a chance to read through it. So typically though, like I said, most of the time what's going to happen is people are going to say to you, hey, just explain to me what I'm signing. So we're going to go through and do that. I'm going to explain it to you. So two things that I want to accomplish. One is what do you fill in and where do you get the information? Two, what does the contract say and how do you explain that to people? So any questions that you have along the way, stop me and we'll talk about it. All right, so here's the first thing is the very top. I want to point out something that in the bold there underneath where it says exclusive right to sell listing agreement and agency disclosure, which you're seeing on the screen, those of you that are on Zoom, is notice that it says right under that, this is a legally binding contract. Read carefully before signing. Now, I just want to point out to you guys to make sure you are aware that this is a legally binding contract that they're signing. And so keep that in mind as we go through it, that meaning if somebody had like, hey, I want my attorney to review it, then that's fine. Let them do that because this is a legally binding contract. All right. Okay, next. So the agreement is entered into effective the blank day of month of year. So obviously, typically in a class, and I guess I could ask and just let Aaron answer for you guys every time, or you can unmute and answer. But typically I would ask, what date are we going to put in there? And that kind of seems like a little bit of a, well, duh, you're probably going to put today's date in there. Well, typically that is going to be the case. but not always. And so keep in mind that what it's saying is that it's entered into effective the blank day of month of year. So the idea being, and here's what actually ends up happening a lot of times is you're typically going to want to get photographs done, having the photographer go out and take pictures before you have it hit the MLS. But I don't want to wait to have the photography done, or excuse me, to have it signed until after the photography's done. So for me, I typically am going to just date this to be a few days later, depending on, so I'm going to try to find out, hey, how soon can we get the photographer out there? And then I'm going to put the date in there accordingly from that. But you could just also put today's date. But just keep in mind the word effective there, that it's entered into effective the blank date. So you could actually fill it out today, but maybe have it effective on next Monday or whatever, however you wanted to do it, okay? So you're going to put the date in there, the month and the year, and then it is between Century 21 Everest and blank, the seller. Now, here's the first question for you. Where do we get the name we're going to put in there for the seller? And I'm not necessarily expecting you to answer every question, Aaron. Others can answer. They may rely on you, but any thoughts? We'll alternate. I'll make Aaron answer one question and someone from Zoom on the other. Okay, go ahead. Say that again.
Tax records.
Okay, good. So that's great. Yeah. So somebody's throwing in some chats here. Sorry. Who's on title? Good. Yeah. So here's just the thing to keep in mind. So great to put it in the chat box. Just sometimes I might need somebody to remind me that you threw one in the chat box. All right. So yeah, the tax records. So now, but let me talk about that for a second. And here's why. The reason I asked that question of where do we get it is because typically the answer I'm going to get is from the tax records, which is probably going to be the case, but don't solely rely on that. So let me give you an example of that real quick. So this was an agent I was training. So I had an agent that went out, they got a listing, and it was their first ever listing. Brought it back, they had gotten it signed, they had checked the tax records. So they wrote the name in of the seller there from off the tax records. They brought it in, turned it into the office. The office put the property on the MLS. The market was similar to what we're dealing with right now, meaning that if you have a property that's priced good and you put it on the MLS, what's going to happen? It's going to sell. So that's exactly what happened. Now, here's the other thing that I'm going to tell you. So, okay to use the tax records to fill this out, but here's the key. After you do that, once you get this signed, go to the title company and order your preliminary title report right away. So get your preliminary title report ordered as soon as you get this signed by the client. And the reason being is from this story that I'm telling you. So they went to the tax records, pulled what it had, put the guy's name on here, listed the property, put it on the MLS, got an offer. Luckily, before they had accepted the offer, the agent had gotten the preliminary title report from the title company. When you get the preliminary title report, one of the first things you always want to be checking is to make sure that the names that are on the title report is who you got signatures from. So he gets it and notices that it has the guy's name that he had gotten it signed from, but it also had the name of some lady. And he wasn't sure who that was. And so what he did was that he came to me and said, what do I do here? And I said, okay, here's what we need to do is you need to go find out who that is. And we need to get her signature on this document as well. So he goes back to the seller, the guy says to him, hey, I noticed on the information we got that it has this other name on there. Who is this? And the guy says, oh, that's my mom. And he says, oh, great. Well, I need to get your mom's signature. Well, he says, well, my mom is on a cruise and she's not going to be back for a week. Well, now remember, we've already gotten an offer in. So if that's the scenario, so what do we need to do?
See if she can get internet connection and send a document by .loop.
Okay, good. Great. Yeah, excellent idea. Now, but here's the problem. Number one, back then we didn't have .loop, so that didn't work. But number two is she was on a cruise and he said she doesn't have access. I have no way to communicate with her. So now what? take that as nobody knows. All right, here's what I did. Now
Fax
keep in
machine.
mind, what, go ahead.
Fax machine.
Yeah, which that is mostly what we were using at the time was faxes. But she didn't have access. She was on a cruise ship. So here's what I did. Now keep in mind what I said is we had already received an offer. So what I said is to this agent is make sure that you do a counter to the offer you've gotten saying that it is subject to being signed by the mom who is unavailable. So we put that in the contract. Thankfully, we put that in the contract. So we put that in the contract, sent it over, we got it all accepted. Well, a week goes by, because typically that's how long most cruises are typically going to be, right? It's typically a week or less. So a week goes by and the agent goes to the guy and says, hey, I need your mom's signature on this. And he says, oh, well, she is still on the cruise or something. He said she'd be back in a week, and now all of a sudden she's not going to be back in a week. So there's the first red flag a little bit. So another week goes by. Now keep in mind, in the process of this, the buyer's now starting to do their due diligence on the property. Well, another week goes by. We say, we need to get a hold of the mom. And he says, she should be back in a couple days. And so now there's the second red flag of all of a sudden we still can't find her. We finally track down the mom. And when we get a hold of the mom, guess what she says? Yeah, I'm not signing it. The whole reason I'm on title, she said, is because I paid for this house, bought it for my son. He tried this once before selling it. So I had myself put on title so that this wouldn't happen. So now I don't remember the details of when she had herself put on title, but here's the point. You cannot 100% rely on what the tax records say. They are going to be right the majority of the time, but they're not right 100% of the time. So get the signatures. You can also go to the title company before you even go list the property and have them look up who's on title, which is a good idea. But no matter what, order the preliminary title report. So here's the first thing I want to make sure you guys are fully understanding is for this line of putting in the seller's name, order the preliminary title report from the title company. Check that as soon as you get it to make sure you've gotten all the signatures. There's one other, and I'm not going to spend the time on it real quick or detail it out. I'll tell it to you real quick. Was a family that it was in a trust and there were 7 people had to sign the trust. Well, they got signatures from 6 out of the 7. Number 7 wouldn't sign. So just kind of keep in mind, we need to make sure that whoever is on title, we have listed on that line and that we can get their signatures to make this contract valid. All right. If any questions on that, go ahead and unmute and we'll talk about it. Otherwise,
Well, Russ, can you tell us what happened? You couldn't sell the house, right?
oh yeah, that's exactly right. Is what ended up happening. Yeah, sorry. Thank you for what ended up happening on is we had to go back to that buyer and say, unfortunately, the mom is not willing to do this. And as you can imagine, they were ticked. I mean, they were really upset. But what do you do? Like we thankfully, if on our side we had put that it was subject to the mom selling or signing, and then she wouldn't sign. So like we were within our right on the contract. But imagine if it was your buyer, you'd be pretty upset thinking, because all along the guy's like, oh yeah, she'll sign it when she gets home. She'll sign it when she gets home, but she didn't. So yeah, thanks, Matt. All right, next, term of the listing. So the seller hereby grants to the company, which I'm not going to read the whole entire thing. There are sections I'm going to. The seller hereby grants to the company, including blank, the seller's agent. So this one is the, your name goes in there, right? So that's clear that of what's going to happen is you're going to put your name in there as the seller's agent, as the authorized agent for the company, and ending at 5 p.m. So catch that, 5 p.m. on the blank day of month and year. So how far out do we want to put this expiration date?
6
I was going to
months.
say it's Aaron's turn to answer. So I'm just kidding. Yeah, he said 6 months. Now, so here's the key thing. You'll notice it's just got a blank month, day, month, and year. So that means it is somewhat negotiable. But I would say as a general rule, you're going to typically do 6 months on the listing agreement. Now we'll talk when we do the buyer packet, we'll talk about that one, that date, because that one I take a little bit different approach on. But here's for me, and again, this is more of a personal thing that I'm going to say now, but I would say error on this side of more like a 6 month, But here's the thing. I have had scenarios, and I'm not opposed to a scenario. If somebody said, hey, I only want to give you 2 or 3 months on it. Well, if they're going to price the property to sell, I'm probably not going to argue about how the length of this contract if I know the property is going to sell. If for some reason I feel like it's not going to sell though, like meaning that they're pricing it a little bit high, I'm going to really push for a longer time frame. So I'll give you kind of my general rule. And this is just personal preference for me. But I'm going to typically err for the side of 6 months. But for me, I almost like the minimum for me is generally 4 months. Is I'm going to really say I want 4 months. Now, here's why. The reason I usually want 4 months on it at a minimum. Now, again, I'm going to most of the time do 6 months, but I'm willing to go down to 4 if I need to. And here's why for me. I just have always felt like when we do the amount of marketing and exposure and stuff we're going to give to that property, I want to have a fair chance of me being able to get paid from that property selling. But even if it doesn't sell, I want to be able to recoup some of the marketing dollars that the company spends on my behalf on this property. And I want to have about 4 months at least to be able to have leads come in off of that property, phone calls come in off the property that I could potentially turn into other deals if that property is not going to sell. So like, let me give you a quick example on with something of that. I had an agent recently that had gone out, listed it for sale by owner, was overpriced, knew it was a little bit, actually, let me back up on that. It wasn't initially overpriced. When he listed it, he got them to list it at a good market value. But the next day they called and said, hey, changed our mind. We want the price to be 100,000 higher than it was. So it went from if I remember right, 650 to like 750. Well, in that scenario, so the agent says, well, let's try it and see what happens. Because here's the thing. I have learned you can never outguess the market. And meaning I've listed properties at prices that I thought were way too high and they sell the next day. I've also listed them at prices that I thought would sell the next day with multiple offers and it did never sell. So I've learned you can't outguess the market. So he says, well, I'll try it and see. So he takes the listing 100,000 overpriced. As you can guess, nothing really happened with it. Well, the agent comes to me and says, hey, I think I'm going to give this listing back because it's never going to sell. Well, after him saying that, the first question I'm always going to ask when somebody's saying I want to give a listing back, the first question I'm going to ask is, are you getting phone calls and or leads from source, internet leads, whatever, meaning people inquiring online? Are you getting leads from it or phone calls about it, asking questions? And if the answer is yes to that, like I'm all for, let's tell the seller, be truthful. Hey, that at this point, your property's overpriced. It's probably never going to sell. And that I'm really probably just generating other deals as a result of it. And if they're okay with that, great. Then let's let them go ahead and keep the property on the market. So that's what I did with this agent. I said, hey, are you getting calls and things off of it? Yes. Well, if you're doing that, it may be worth still having your sign and doing the marketing out there, even if the property isn't going to sell. And so he did. But now here's the interesting thing is then later on, he ended up getting an offer on the property as well. So anyway, we'll see what happens. All right. So on the date, so typically for me, minimum 4 months. Most of the time,
I'm checking. I'm sorry, I don't know. I got.
You can mute your phone, somebody, whoever's mute your computer, whoever's talking, or else
On.
come and mute everyone.
All
right, I'll mute you, Tim. Call you out. I'll call you out if you unmute yourself and keep talking. All right, here we go. So the next piece of this then, so that's where we're going to put in the expiration date. And then the next blank line down is where we're going to put the address of the property. So you're going to get the address of the property, throw that in there, and that's section 1. Any questions on filling out section 1? Although I just remembered one thing that I do need to add to it. So the other thing I'm going to add to it is right after you've put in the address of the property, notice it says at the listing price and terms stated on the attached property data form. So there's an MLS data sheet that we'll talk about here in just a minute and that will be incorporated as well. All right, next, brokerage fee. So on this section, typically how I'm going to handle this one is, again, on this one is mostly going to be just me explaining it to the client and talking about it. Now you'll notice on this form that it shows the brokerage fee of being 7% plus a $4.95 administration fee that for the property. Now, on that, we have on dotloop multiples of these listing agreements available. Meaning, we have them that show at 6%, we show them at 7%, we've got them at 6% and a 295, 6% 395, 6% 495, 595, 695, and 7% with the 295, 395, 495, 595. So just kind of know that the expectation from within the company is that you're going to do it as a 6% listing. Anything less than that, you should get approval from a broker. But the reason I use this form here, in fact, I guess I should scroll this up on the screen so you guys can see it a little better. Sorry about that. Feel free to remind me if I forget to do that. The reason I use this one that is showing as a 7% is because don't just assume that you're not going to be able to get a 6 or a 7%, because here's what happens is that first listing I told you about when my broker just handed me the documents and said, go get it signed. It said 7% on it. And I didn't really know, like I'm brand new. I didn't know how all this works. I assumed it was 6%, but I got out there to that listing appointment and I sat down with the agreement and I said to the seller, okay, here's what it says. And I'm looking through and I notice when I get to brokerage fee that it says 6% or 7%. And so I just said, hey, it's a 7% commission. And then of that, 3% is going to go to whoever brings in the buyer and blah, blah, blah. And the guy was fine with it and signed it. So I go back to the office and I go to my manager and I'm like, hey, I got it all signed. Tell me what I need to do next. And I handed him the papers. Well, he takes it and he looks down and he goes, wow, they signed it, huh? And I was like, yeah. He's like, that's great. Congratulations. I was like, yeah, thanks. The next Tuesday, we had our office sales meeting. At the sales meeting, the manager comes in and he goes, hey, Russ, or hey guys, Russ got his first listing, give him a hand. And everybody starts clapping. Yeah, good job. And then he goes, but hold on. You guys are not going to believe this, but he took a 7% listing on his first listing ever. And everybody's like, whoa. And they start clapping their hands. And I'm like, well, in my mind, I'm standing there kind of going, well, like, doesn't everybody do 7% listings? I just assumed everyone did. And so here's the thing. Sometimes being ignorant is better than knowing better. You know, I just didn't know. And so I went out and got it signed. Now, I have trained a number of agents that because of me telling that story have gone out and done 7% listings over and over and over and over and over again. And in fact, I had one agent that I trained that 2 years later, I ran into him and was asking him how business was. And he said, you know, I've still never taken a listing at less than 7%. So just keep in mind, you can do it and it is okay and it is possible to do that. Now, there are some things that I will give you in terms of some ideas on how to make that happen. And one of them being this, is explaining to the seller how it all works. Now, like I said, I typically, when I first would do this, if I would do a 7%, I would keep 4 and offer 3 to whoever brought in the buyer. Well, one day I had a client that was challenging me on it. And so what I said was this, well, what if what we did is I'm going to do it a 7% commission, but I'm going to offer 3.5 to bring in the buyer. Now, here's why. Prior to that, I had gone out and I was working with a buyer and I was showing them some homes out in West Jordan. In fact, I still know exactly where this house was because it made this big of an impact on me. We're walking through the house. So I'm out showing properties to these guys. And as we're walking through the properties, I just kind of, and to some extent, I still do this, although because of what's happening in the market today, meaning the real estate market, not COVID-19, I'm talking before even any of that hit. So starting, you know, mid last year-ish, I've started to look a little bit more than what I'm going to tell you now. But for me, I would print out properties and go show them to clients, MLS sheets. I would go show them to the clients, and I would never look to see what the BAC was, what they were offering as a commission, until we were in the house and I could tell the client liked it. Like for me, until that happened, I was like, it doesn't matter what it says. So I would be walking through showing properties And as soon as I could start to see the buying signals going on that like, oh, we could put our couch here and we could this, and I could tell they were liking it, I would usually glance down to see what they were offering for BAC. Well, part of the reason I didn't worry about it too much was because back then, pretty much every property would get 3%. It was not uncommon. Well, this one particular house though, we're walking through it and they're falling in love with it. And I glanced down and noticed BAC is 3.5. And I'm like, oh man. Like all of a sudden I love this house too, you know? So I'm telling him how, oh yeah, for sure. This is great. Well, I remember closing on that property and getting paid 3.5% and how excited I was. Now, here's what it taught me though, is that makes a difference. Meaning, when you guys pull one up and you see that the buyer's agent is going to get paid 2 or 2.5, or I've seen them $4,000 or $1 even from some of these companies. When you see that, like, it's discouraging when you see it. But imagine now you're on the other side and you see one that shows 3.5 or 4%. All of a sudden now you're pretty excited about that property. So part of what you can do in order to get a seller to agree to a higher than 6%, or at least a minimum of 6%, is by explaining that piece to them, helping them understand that the way that it works is agents, believe it or not, or like it or not, are going to make decisions about properties they're going to show based on that. Now they shouldn't. We all learned in real estate school that they shouldn't make a decision that way, right? They should be doing what's in the best interest of their client. However, you know as well as I do, if you pull up 5 properties, most agents, they're going to pull up 5 properties. They're going to show the one that's offering less than 3% last. Like, let's see if they like these other properties first, then we'll take them to that one. So if you just can explain to, just like human nature is going to tell a client that a buyer's agent is going to take that into mind. So here's how I explain it to my clients, is I always explain it to them this way. Essentially, we've got to sell your house 3 times. Now, that doesn't mean we've got to find 3 different buyers, but to find one buyer, your home has got to be sold 3 different times. The first people we have to sell your home to is the agents. We got to get the agents to want to even show the property first. And the way that we do that is through what we're going to offer to them as a commission. And I will say to them, imagine being told tomorrow going to your job that you have to do it for 1/3 less, meaning that they were going to get a 2% commission instead of a 3%. How excited are you to go do your job? Probably not too excited, right? Versus if on the other side, what if your boss came to you, and this is what I'll say to a seller, what if your boss came to you though and said, hey, you're going to do the exact same work tomorrow that you did today, but this time I'm going to pay you a little bit more. All of a sudden, you're excited about doing your job a little more, right? Well, that's how this works with the BAC. So I will explain to them, like, look, the reason I recommend you do a 7% commission, and in fact, I have done a lot of 8% commissions, and the reason is because I told them, imagine if we offered 4% to whoever brings in the buyer. Well, I just am going to make sure I get the same amount. I'm not going to work for less than the buyer's agent. So for me, that's where I would do an 8%. We have an agent up in our Centerville office that did a lot of 8% listings. His name's Trent Hyde. So if you want to look on this MLS, you can go back and look at this. He hasn't done it recently, but back in 2009, 2010, he did a lot of this. And what he would do is he would go in and tell the seller, look, we're going to list it at 8% and I'm going to offer 5% to whoever brings in the buyer. Now imagine you're the buyer's agent on that and you see I'm going to get paid 5%. You're going to be pretty excited about it. So just keep that in mind as a way to help explain and to keep your commissions up. Is I always just say, look, we have to split it. So for me, and I've told Trent this a number of times, I think he could have accomplished the same thing listing at 8 and offering 4 and keeping 4. But he would always offer 5. Now here's the other interesting thing. And if you stop and think about this, it makes sense. By doing that, he would offer 5% to whoever brings in the buyer. If you were to go back, and again, like I say, if you want to go check this, you're welcome to do it. I'll tell you how you can check it right now. Go on the MLS. You can go search for Trent Hyde as the listing agent, pull up properties that he sold. And he was doing this 2009, 2010, I think 11, maybe even 12. I don't remember exact dates. But you go look up one of those properties, then do a CMA on that property for when it's sold. So meaning if you ran a CMA, I'm glad Aaron's here because I hate teaching these classes with nobody here. I feel bad for Aaron because I'm like staring at him the whole time. I'm trying not to. But if you went and ran a CMA on his properties and you looked for that time frame, what you will see is the properties for the neighborhood for the CMA you run are going to be at the top of the range. Meaning those properties, typically his properties would sell for a higher dollar amount than the ones that were offering a lower commission. Now, if you stop and think about that for a minute, it makes sense of why that is though, because here's why. Imagine you're the buyer's agent. You get the property under contract. Number one, you're gonna want, so here's the other thing. If it's a borderline, should I show it or not? And you're gonna get paid a 4 or 5% commission, you're probably showing it. I mean, tell the truth. If it's borderline of, hey, it's pretty close to my clients what they want, but it's may not 100%, maybe it's 95%, you're probably showing it just because of that. So if you can help a seller to understand that is first thing. But now let's talk through it. Let's say, and again, I would have this conversation with the seller about commission if I need to in order to get this commission to be a little bit higher. Imagine that you're offering a 5% commission to whoever brings it. Let's do 4. Because for me, I never would do 5 unless they're going to list it for 10. But I'm going to offer a 4%. So imagine you're the buyer's agent. You're going to get a 4% commission from this property. When it comes time to make the offer, now again, put yourself aside maybe for a minute and just let's think like the general population, most agents. Most agents, when their client says to them, what should we offer? What do you think most agents are going to say? All right, I'll help you. They're probably going to say, hey, this is a pretty good deal. Like at that price, it's probably a pretty fair price. Now, part of that is if you just stop and think about it, when you're on the listing side, you want the buyer's agents thinking that way. And as a seller, I would want them thinking that way. So I want them thinking that way of like, hey, I want that the buyer's agent's probably going to encourage their client to make a higher offer because of, meaning no low balls, because of what the commission is. But let's take it a step further than that. Now we get it under contract and it's time for due diligence. And they go do a home inspection. And at the end of the home inspection, there's things that need to be repaired. The buyer's agent is probably going to do everything they can to keep this deal together. Why?
Sell it.
Yeah, because if this deal fails, they got to go take their client to another house. And instead of getting paid 4%, so let's just use $300,000. Instead of getting paid $12,000, they're going to get $9,000. Like all of a sudden that agent wants to keep the deal together. So when I'm explaining this to a seller, I'm explaining to the seller that to some extent, we're going to get that buyer's agent working on our behalf with their client, convincing their client not to ask for extra things, not to cancel the deal. We're going to keep the deal together. That's why I believe when you go look at Trent Hydes and you'll see that when he offered a 5% commission, that people typically were willing to pay a higher price if you ran a CMA for the rest of the properties. They sold for the higher price in the neighborhood because of exactly what we're talking about. So anyway, just some ideas on how to get that little bit commission a little bit higher. All right, here's what this section says. Now I spent way more time with you guys on that than I typically would a seller, but just so you know. On this section, when I'm explaining it to them, I'm just telling them, here's what it says. What it says is the commission will be 7% plus a $495 acquisition fee that is payable after I do my job. Until I do my job, you don't pay me anything. So I'm working for free until I get the job done. Try to go get a mechanic to do, work on your car for free or whatever. Like I'm working for free until the job is done. And if I don't get the job done, I never get paid at all. Okay. So that's how I'm going to explain that. So what questions do you guys have about the brokerage fee? There's usually one that's going to come up every time I teach this class. So I'll just wait till you ask it.
You said that there's 3 different times that we have to sell your home. The first time is when I'm selling it to the agents. What are the other 2 times?
Oh, thank you. So the first time is to the agent. Second time is going to be to the buyers. And the third time is we got to sell it to the appraiser. So yeah, thanks, Matt. So we got to get the agents to want to show it, an actual buyer to want to buy it, and then the appraiser to agree on our price. So not so much the sell to the appraiser as much as just convince them, I guess, that it's the right price. So that's how I like to look at it. So good. What other questions? There's one other one that usually comes up. And if you don't ask, then I'll just skip and move on.
I got a question, Russ, because I was reading an article the other day, and I can see 10 years ago that the buyer's commission is, 6%, but it's statistically, if you look at like Realogy, right? You know what I mean? It
Yep.
looks like that it's gone closer to 2.5, or right. I'm just saying statistics, right? And this is throughout the nation, not necessarily here. And I understand like why we want to keep it at 3 and 3, but I'm not going to not take a listing if I can't get them, I want to sell houses, right? So and to me it's transactions. So if it's 2.5 and 2.5, I'm going to take it, right?
Yeah, I guess I'm not, but you can.
You wouldn't take it?
Well, it kind of depends on the scenario, but like for me, I'm telling you, I have not done very many, and I'm gonna do as best as I can of explaining everything we've just talked about first, about how it is not going to be in your best interest. Now, I'm not saying I wouldn't, but I'm going to be very, very hesitant personally to do that. And here's why. Actually, I'll give you the reason why. Here's what I'll tell you. At one time, so I started with a big name broker, and I left that company in 2001 and went to a 100% shop where basically I paid a monthly fee to the broker and got to keep all the commission. And I did it thinking somewhat what you're saying, Matt, is the idea being like, hey, if I can go get a 4% listing and I offer 3, I'm still going to make a couple grand, and that's good enough for me. But here's what I found. And this is why I say I'm a little hesitant to do it. Here's what I found is I would go do a 4% listing, and then at closing, that same seller was trying to take part of that commission from me. And what I found was that the people who wanted a 4% listing like that are also I worked harder for those and made less money. And after a year and a half, I was like, I'm done with that. I'm never doing it again. So that's kind of more where I'm coming from, is I kind of have this little bit of a bias from what I've dealt with. Of the people who are not willing to pay it typically are also the people who are the biggest pain in the butt that you should have charged at 10% commission or whatever. So anyway,
Sure. So
here's what I would just say. Anything less than 6%, talk to a broker. The idea being, I'm going to probably, and if you came to me, Matt, and said, hey, I want to list this at 5%, I'm going to probably say, have you had this conversation? We're going to look through it and talk about it. Now, the times that I have done it, though, is more when it's like a short sale or something. So hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, here's part of it for me, Matt, when you bring that up. Part of the struggle for me on this is you're exactly right. The pressure on our commissions is down, and it probably will end up being that before too long, to where we are seeing, and we're already starting to see it, where a common is 2 or 2.5. Now, if the prices soften, I'm not sure they will, but if they do, is when we'll see them start to go back up again. So that's the other side of it. Good.
I started thinking about too, Russ. All I'm dealing with now is FSBOs, so that's why.
That good point. That's the other reason you are going to be having that as a. You're going to run into that big time as a challenge, but again, use that with the FSBOs as a way of showing them, because I've also seen people go out on that same FSBO that's beating you up and list it at 7%. So, all right, good. What other questions on the brokerage fee? Okay. We're 45 minutes in and we've covered 2 sections. We'll just be here for the rest of the day. No, we'll go faster. All right, section 3 then. Protection period. Oh, you know what? It's probably time that I tell you guys to put something in the chat box. Let's see. What should we put in the chat box?
Rick is great.
Put in the chat box. Here's what I want you to put. Rick wants you to put Rick is great. In the chat box, what I need you to put in there is how much you're going to charge minimum commission on a property that you're going to list. So everybody, This is, again, if you don't put in what your minimum commission is going to be, I can't give you credit for this class. You got to have some, that's how I check to make sure you're paying attention. All right, good job, guys. Matt just put 3%. I'm just kidding. He didn't. All right, next, protection period. So section 3. Protection period is if within blank months of the termination of the expiration of the listing agreement, the property is acquired from any other party. So on that blank line, what are we going to put in there?
6 months.
What's that, Tim?
6 months.
6 months. Okay. Any other thoughts?
12 months, depending on the price of the listing.
12 months. Okay, good. I like that. Any other thoughts?
2.
2 months. Okay, good. So here's the thing is on that, just keep in mind that it really doesn't matter too much what you put in there, but here's what I will tell you. Don't put 0. I have seen that a few times, and typically when I've seen that is when it comes back to bite the agent who put it. So just keep in mind that, you know, here's how I think about this section, and this is even what I tell a seller. So if you were my seller, this is how I would explain it. Is I would probably put in there 3 months for me personally, is I put 2 or 3 months and usually 3, but 6 is totally fine as well. But here's what I tell the seller. This section is to keep honest people honest. Basically what it says is that if our listing agreement expires in 4 months or 6 months or whatever, a year, whatever it is, which I probably should have said that back on the date, is depending on price range. If I were listing $1 million property or $2 million property, I might want to put it longer than 6 months too, as the up in section 1. But in section 3, I'm typically going to put 3 months in there. And I just explained to the seller, this is to keep honest people honest. It's basically to keep you from telling somebody, hey, come back in 2 or 3 months and buy the house from me, is really what that section is for. But make sure you put something in there though, because I have seen agents put 0. And then what happens is it expired, and the next day somebody that they showed it to wants to buy it, and now all of a sudden you're not entitled to a commission. We had one within the company recently that the seller had sold the home to the person, but we had the protection period in there, and we went after him and got the commission. So just keep that in mind. Like, we want to have some time frame in there, even if it's only 1 month. At least put an amount of time, and I just always feel like 3 months is good enough. But because here's the other side of it, I'm not going to go spend it. If I have a property that expires and they don't relist with me, I'm probably not tracking them down to see what happened to the listing 2 months later or 3 months later. So that's why I don't typically worry about 6 months or a year on it, because if they relist the property with somebody else, you're probably not getting paid anyway. But that is a distinction between our contract. So this is a good place to bring this up. The contract on the MLS, and some agents within Everest will go use an MLS listing agreement, is worded to say that if they have relisted with somebody else and somebody we showed the property to buys it, that we wouldn't be entitled to a commission. But our contract, basically, if you read it, says we still would be entitled to the commission. Now, I'm not sure we would ever be able to follow through on that. It would depend on the scenario, but we at least have that built in there. Okay.
I have
All
a
right,
question.
Go ahead.
I have an invested interest in a home I'm putting up for sale today, probably. It's my in-laws' home. Would it be a benefit to ask 7% commission when have that invested interest in it, or is it better when it's something like that to stay at the 6%?
Yeah, so where you have a vested interest in so are you on title?
No, my husband is.
Be your husband. Okay. So, yeah, I would just say in that scenario, then just kind of decide the biggest thing that's going to take place in that type of a scenario is, here's how I usually explain it, is you can do with your portion of the commission whatever you want. And what I mean by that is, if you were to, and I'm just going to throw out some round numbers to make it simple. But let's say it was a $10,000 commission and you were on a 50-50 split with the company, then you can do with your $5,000 whatever you want. You just don't get to do whatever you want with the company's $5,000, if that makes sense. So in terms of that, like, I would just say kind of decide on that. In essence, from the company's point of view, they're going to look at it and say it should be a 6% listing. So we should get whatever your split is, 3% of whatever the purchase price would be. Hopefully that makes sense. So your portion of it, you could do whatever you want with. But I would still say it's not, like for me personally, listing my own house, I would never list it and only offer 2% to whoever brings in the buyer. Minimum's going to be 3 for me. And part of it is just, I also have kind of this passion of like, we got to look out for ourselves, or before you know it, we're all going to be doing our jobs for a lot less money. So anyway, that's
my
what
concern.
Go ahead.
Sorry, my
you're good.
concern was like, am I robbing Peter to pay Paul when it's mine? You know what I mean? So I'm asking more commission, but am I losing money because I'm asking more? Am I taking money away from, you know what I'm saying? It's.
Yep. Yeah, and that's where I was saying, I guess what I would just say is kind of decide between you and your husband what
we want.
That's right. What percentage, how much of the commission, like calculate it, figure out based on the purchase price and what your split is, what the company's going to make, and then decide from there how much you guys feel like you should make. That's going to decide the listing side of the commission. The buyer side, like I said, I would do a minimum of 3%.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Thanks for asking. All right, next, section 4, seller's warranties and disclosures. So in this section, the seller's warranties and disclosures, when I'm explaining to a seller, here's how I explain it to them, is basically what they are doing is they're warranting that they are the owners of the property. They have the right to be selling the property, and that they will disclose everything they know about the property. So again, just keep in mind, typically the seller's going to say, just tell me what I'm signing. I go through and explain each section. And on this section, that's how I explain it. You're warranting that you have the right to sell it and sign on behalf of the property. You're also agreeing that you're going to disclose everything you know about the property. And then usually for me at that point, if I were sitting with a seller, I would pull out the seller disclosures and explain seller disclosures to them. For the sake of what we're doing today in class, I'm going to wait till we get to the seller disclosures. But just know if I'm sitting with a seller, typically here is where I would give them the seller disclosures and ask them to fill them out. And I'll explain that piece of it when we get to them. All right, next. And again, I'm going to pick up the pace here a little bit. So if
Can you scroll down, Ross?
What's that?
Can you scroll down on
Thank
your,
you. Thank you.
please? Yep.
All right, I'm going to go to the agency here. Well, I'll put it to right there for now. Thank you. Yeah, you probably have to remind me again, but keep reminding me. All right, next is going to be the agency relationships. And on the agency relationships, when I get to this section, I'm just explaining to the seller how it works. I'm explaining to them that I'm representing them as the seller's agent. Now, here's how I usually explain it. And I think if you probably have a little bit of a screen of me on there that you can see potentially. I'm standing at the table right now, and usually I've got a seller that's sitting on the other side of the table. And I usually will use that table as a way to explain to them when I get to this. If we're sitting opposite each other on the table, I will tell them, like right now we're on opposite sides of the table, but what this contract is saying is we're really on the same side of the table. Meaning you and I are sitting next to each other when it comes to this process. We're not negotiating against each other. I'm there to help you. My job is to look out for your best interest. Like, don't feel like we're adversaries. And if you ever feel like that as a client, you need to tell me, because we're not. I'm not trying to do anything to hurt you. I'm on your side. My job is to help you. And that's what this section is saying. And then 5.2 is the duties of a limited agent, is I just explained to them is what this is saying is in the event somebody calls me off the sign and says, I want to go look at the property, I'm right now your agent, but if that were to happen, it's possible I could become a limited agent, meaning I would represent them in the purchase as well. And so what that means for you is that I would just have to be limited. I couldn't tell them the least you would take for the property, but I can't tell you the most they would spend on the property either. So I have to just stay neutral. And that's what that section is saying. And then, so for this, that pretty much completes this first page that we're on here. So let me scroll down some more here for you guys. You'll see there's a spot to have them initial and date it. So if I'm live in person with them, I just have them initial and date it. If I'm going to send it to them through a dot loop, then I'll, drop the initials in there. All right, next. And again, I'm picking up the pace, so slow me down if you have questions. Don't be afraid to stop. Next, so on the next page is the expiration. The expiration date of this contract will automatically extend to the closing date if the property is under contract. So this section is saying is that expiration date we put in section 1, if our closing date is after that date, that this contract will, expiration date will extend to that date. And when the property is pending or under contract, seller instructs the agent not to present any more offers. So there, you learned in real estate school that anytime an offer is written, you have to present it, right? Well, what our section on this contract is saying is not anymore, because we're now agreeing that once we have an offer accepted, we don't need to present any other offers to them. Now, you might want to, so you might tell the seller, hey, if it makes sense to, I will bring it to you, but there's no use in us looking at other offers if once we have this one. Now, the reason behind that is, again, like, stop and think about it for a minute. And to some extent, you might want to look at doing something like this if you're working with a buyer. You get a buyer that goes in, they get in on a multiple offer scenario. Now, if that happens, I always recommend to my buyer, offer the amount that you will not regret if you don't get it. Meaning if somebody paid $1 more, that you'd be like, I wouldn't have paid that $1. Now, if you would have paid the $1, then offer more. But occasionally you'll have a client, though, that they write an offer, they say, nope, this is our highest and best. They don't get the property, and then they say, oh, well, we should have offered 10,000 more or something, whatever. So if you stop and think about it, you could then go rewrite another offer that is $10,000 more, even though they've already accepted an offer. Now, because state law says that the agent has to present that offer, imagine what the seller's going to do and think if you showed up, or their agent showed up and says, hey, we got this other offer and it's $10,000 more than this, what you already had offered to you. Now, the seller can't just go cancel a contract. They don't have as many rights as a buyer on a REPC, but they could create a scenario where maybe they aren't as willing or whatever. So I guess what I'm saying is, what you don't want to do, if you look at our section here, this prevents that from happening. Now, the truth is it doesn't happen very often, but that would prevent it, because if you got another offer that was a lot higher that you were like, I don't know if we want to present this or not, you don't have to, because we've agreed. Now that we've got it accepted, we don't need to present other offers, okay? And where that really comes into play is when we start dealing with short sales, which hopefully doesn't happen, but could. All right, next, section 7, professional advice. When I get to this section, this is where I will point out to the seller, you'll see in all caps, seller is advised not to rely on the company or the agents of the company for a determination regarding the physical or legal condition of the property. So this is where, when I get to this, I'm just telling them, look, I'm not a property inspector, I'm not a CPA, I'm not an attorney. Don't rely on me for that type of stuff, okay? And so that's what the professional advice section is just, that's kind of a CYA for us. So they can't come back on us and say, oh, well, you told me that I wouldn't have to pay capital gains tax or whatever. So number one, don't try to be an attorney or a CPA or property inspector, but this is acknowledging to them that we're not. All right. 8, dispute resolution. This is where we are agreeing, if a dispute arises, we shall first go to mediation before going to court. So on the REPC, they have the option of shall or may, but on our contracts between us and our client, it is we shall. We are going to go to mediation first, okay? So just keep that in mind. Section 9 is attorney's fees. This just says, in the event that we end up in court, the prevailing party is entitled to reasonable attorney's fees. And so whoever wins in court gets their their attorney's fees paid for. And as I'm hitting this to you guys, this is exactly how I'm explaining it to the client. Section 10 is seller advertising and seller authorizations. In this section is where the seller is now authorizing us. So on this, I will usually go through this with the seller to point these things out, that this is what they're authorizing. So if you look at 10A, is that they're authorizing us to disclose to the MLS after closing the final terms of the sales price. You guys didn't tell me that I didn't need to scoot it up. Is it time for another chat box question? Make sure you're not sleeping. Wake up. All right. Section 10 here. 10A. is, and so I'm going to ask a question after this, so you're going to have to put it in the chat box. So make sure you're paying attention and put it in the chat box. Actually, you know what I'm going to do for the next class? At the start, I'm going to have everybody put in at the top, I acknowledge if I don't respond to the chat box, I don't get credit. Then that way nobody can argue. That's what the next thing we're going to have to put in. All right. 10A is that we can disclose to the MLS after closing the final terms and the sales price of the property. Now, why would we need that?
For CMAs.
Okay, good. But why do you're right, exactly right. We need it for CMAs, but why do we need permission from the seller to put it?
Because if they don't want it listed to the public, then they don't have to do that.
Okay, good. And why? What allows them that? You're right on.
Well, that's their choice if they want to do it or not, right?
Okay. So there's actually a reason though. It's because we're a non-disclosure state. So we can't disclose the price of a property that it sells for without permission from the seller. So this is where we are getting permission from the seller to disclose that. Okay. So 10B then says to disclose to the MLS the square footage, and then it's got some check boxes. So now on this one, there are two places that the division of real estate requires that a seller disclose where they got the square footage from. This is one of them. So one of the places they have to disclose is to us, which is a little ironic because they have to disclose to us where they got the square footage from. And usually it's us that gave it to them. And then they have to disclose back to us where we got it, basically. So anyway, but that's it. So that's one of them. The second place that they have to disclose where the square footage came from is going to be on the seller disclosures to the buyer. So the seller has to disclose to the brokerage and they have to disclose to the buyer where the square footage came from. So you're just going to check whichever box it was of where the square footage came from. So county records, an appraisal, building plans, or some other way. All right, next is that we can get financial information from any lender, that we can have keys to the property, we can have a key box on the property, and that if they authorize it, then we're not responsible. So we're not responsible if something happens, okay? And then F is that we can hold open houses. G is that we can put a for sale sign or a sold sign on the property. H, we can order a preliminary title report. I, that we can order a home warranty. J is that we can communicate with the seller for the purposes of marketing the home, which that's basically to overcome the do not call list. K is that we can put the earnest money into an interest-bearing trust account, which we do not do, by the way. We don't do that, but this contract gives us the right to, and we actually looked at doing it, but there was so much red tape, we decided not to. L is that when the property is pending or under contract, that they instruct us not to present offers. So that one's just a double from up in section 6. And then M is in the event that the buyer's agent requests to come and present the offer in person, that the seller is authorizing us to decide if we will let them or not. Now, when I first started in the business, it was very common for us to do that, to go and present an offer in person. Today, in fact, we just had one, my son listed a property in Eagle Mountain or Saratoga Springs, can't remember which. And the agent sent over an offer and never called, never texted, didn't do, like, it's crazy to me how poor people are representing their clients. So not a bad idea to present the offer in person if you can. A lot of agents may not let you, but in our contract, it says we get to decide if we're going to let them or not. All right, section 11 is personal property, and this is where the seller is acknowledging that they're responsible for personal property, not us. So let me explain that. And when I'm with a seller, I stop on this section to have this conversation. When I get to this section, I always want to tell the seller, let me scroll down. All right, we get to where you guys can see this here. All right, throw in the chat box here again. This is where I got to test you guys again. Throw in the chat box. Why do we have to get permission to disclose the sales price? Because we're what kind of a state? So throw in the chat box, we're a non-disclosure state. Then I know you're listening. All right. I hate that I have to do that, by the way, but it's what the division requires for me to give you credit. So we're doing it. All right, next. So this personal property. When I get to this personal property section, here's how I handle it with the seller. What I always tell the seller is if you have personal property in here that you do not want the buyers to ask for, let's get rid of it right now. And what I mean by that is, let me give you two examples that I've seen. One was a shelf that was on the wall. Well, so we'll use the screen here that, I don't know if you guys can see the screen up there. I mean, it's not down, the black thing at the top of your screen up here. I've had a scenario where it was a shelf that was on the wall and the seller said, we're not going to include that shelf in the sale of the property. So I said, okay. And we put it on the MLS. We got an offer in, and guess what? On the rep sheet, they said, seller to include the shelf in the kitchen. And my seller said, we're not including the shelf. So we countered back. Shelf is not included. The buyers came back and said, purchase price to be whatever, shelf to be included. My seller's like, I'm not going to include the shelf. So I called the buyer's agent and I said, my seller's not willing to include the shelf. We put it on the MLS that it was not included. And the agent said, my clients won't buy the house without the shelf. Like it became a sticking point on the deal happening or not. And my first deal I ever did on representing a buyer, same kind of a thing. My buyer was like, we won't buy the house if they don't leave the stove. We want the stove. Like it's stupid, some of this stuff. So, but as a result of that, I always just tell the seller, as soon as they say the shelf's not included, great, get it out of here. Replace it with one you will leave or patch the holes, whatever. The other one that I had real quick was a ceiling fan. Same thing. I don't know what the emotional attachment was to the ceiling fan, but the seller was like, I'll replace the ceiling fan, but I'm not going to include that one. I'm taking it with me. And I don't remember what the reasoning was. It like was just a special ceiling fan, I guess. So I said, okay, then you need to replace it. And they did, and they said they would, but then they didn't. And then we had put on the MLS that it was not included, that it would be replaced. The buyer came in, same thing. We want the ceiling fan. So for me, this personal property section, when I get to that section, I just tell the seller, if you are worried about it, get it out now because then it won't be an issue. Okay. So the other thing I tell them on this is we are not an insurer against something happening. We had a scenario a few years ago where a property was listed. The agents had told them this same thing. We're not an insurer. The guy had a like an office type of a fridge, like one you would put in your office here at work. Fridge, there's just a small one in their bedroom, which I don't know why you would do that, but they had one in their bedroom. The guy kept $600 in cash in that fridge, came home one day after a showing and called our listing agent and said, my $600 is gone. This section says we're not responsible. So don't, if you have drugs, guns, whatever, illegal or illegal drugs, I guess, get rid of them. If you're, don't have them in because we're not responsible if somebody steals them. All right, that's the personal property section. Next is section 12 here, is the attachments. All right, this one you're either going to check there are or there are not additional attachments to the property, to this listing agreement, which is basically just going to be if you're going to do an addendum. And I will tell you, it's pretty rare that you're going to check the box that there are and put an addendum to it. But just know that if you need to, you can do that. You can check the box for there are an addendum and you could put something. Let me give you an example of why you would do that. Is Matt brought up earlier that he was calling mostly for sale by owners. You go out to list a for sale by owner, and at the for sale by owner, they say to you, well, I would list my property with you, but I've got these 3 people who have expressed interest, so I want to wait until I know if they're going to buy it or not. Well, that would be a scenario where I would say, let's list it and we'll exclude those 3 people from this contract. Meaning if they buy it, you won't have to pay a commission. Then I would check the R box on this. I would get the addendum to this and I would put in there, the following people are excluded from this contract. No commissions will be paid if they purchase the property in the next 30 days. Put a time frame on it. Don't just leave it wide open. I always say in the next 30 days. All right, so that's the attachment. Next is equal housing opportunity. This section is where what we are doing is we are agreeing between us and the seller that we will follow all of the fair housing laws, basically, is what it is that we're going to follow the state and federal laws regarding equal housing opportunity. Okay. Section 14 is electronic transmissions and counterparts. Excuse me. And what we're saying on this is that we're agreeing that it's okay to sign electronically and that we could do them as counterparts. We don't really do counterparts anymore. Back when we were talking before, when Tim brought up a fax, with faxes, we would do counterparts. And basically what that was, you fax one to the husband and one to the wife at work. They both signed their copy and sent it back. So you don't have one document with both their signatures on it. You've got two copies of the same document. One's got his and one's got hers. That would be counterparts. So we're agreeing that's okay. So if for some reason you had to do that, it is okay to do that. Section 15 is the due on sale. When I get to this section with the seller, what I typically do is I will just explain to them what the due on sale means. And for a seller, so in fact, here's where I'm going to get you guys involved again. There are 2 times that a due on sale clause could come into play for a seller. What are they? Any ideas? I'll give you a hint. If they just do a traditional sale, so most of the transactions that take place, somebody just putting their property on the market and selling it, the due on sale clause is never going to come into play, and they don't even need to we don't even need to have a discussion about it with our seller. But there's 2 opportunities that a seller could do that could create this due on sale clause to be a problem for them. All right, I'll give you a hint. The first one would be potentially doing a lease option. If they did a lease option, it could potentially create a due on sale clause where their lender coming and saying, nope, you can't do that. What's the other one? Seller financing. So if the seller were to do a seller finance, this due on, so essentially what I would get, when I get to this section, I'm just telling the seller, if we do a seller finance or a lease option, we need to have a discussion about this. Are you willing to do that? And that's usually where I'll ask them, are you willing to seller finance or do lease option? Nope. Okay. Then this isn't going to really come into play. Doesn't really matter. But basically what it's saying is if they were to do a seller finance, they run the risk that if the bank found out, they could call that note due and payable. And now it could present a big problem for this buyer if they can't pay off the loan. Okay. All right. Section 16 is what's called FIRPTA, or the Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act. Basically what this one is, this tells you how great the government and the IRS works. Because here's what it says. The FIRPTA, or the Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act, says if the seller is a foreign investor and they sell a property for a gain, they get a capital gain off of it, the buyer is responsible to make sure the seller provides to the title company a social security number or a tax ID number, which if they're a foreign investor, they're not going to have a tax ID number. So stop and think about that for a minute. If the seller sells the property and has a capital gain, the buyer is responsible to make sure the seller gives to the title company their tax ID number. If they don't, the buyer gets to pay the taxes on the capital gain. So for us, when we get to this section, what we were wanting to find out from the seller is, are you a foreign investor as defined by the IRS tax code? Which at the end of the day, really all we need to know is, do they have a tax ID number? And if they do, we just make sure the title company gets it. So you're going to check the box that they either is or they is not a foreign investor. Okay. And if they are, then down on that line at the bottom of that paragraph, which I probably need to scroll up for you guys to see. At the bottom of that line, there's a spot to put a forwarding address for that seller. Okay. So if they are a foreign investor, we want a forwarding address. Okay. All right. Section 17 says this is the entire agreement. There's not anything that's not disclosed in here, that it all is written down, anything we've agreed to. And then they sign it and you sign it as the authorized agent for the company. Now, before we go to the next page, which I'm in control, I guess, because I'm the one scrolling for everyone except for Aaron, you'll notice in red down here, it says, do you have a real estate need or a property to sell or purchase outside of this market? And then there's a spot for yes or no. Now, make sure when you get to that section that you find out, because the idea of this is, can you send an outgoing referral on this person to, if they're leaving here to move somewhere else, or they haven't owned another property somewhere else that they're selling, can you help them with that and find an agent for them? So don't forget to ask that question and then send them as an outgoing referral. The average pay on that is somewhere around $1,000 just for asking that question, can I refer you? And then sending the outgoing referral. All right, and then they're going to initial there. All right, next page is this residential listing input form. So on the residential listing input form, this is the form that you're going to fill out to decide what shows up on the MLS. Now, I want to point out a few things to you. You'll notice here, so you guys that are on Zoom, you'll see these little dots here, like next to where it says list price, there's a dot. Down below that, it says short sale, there's a dot. Down below that, there's house address, there's a dot. Street type, there's not a dot. Quadrant, there's not a dot. Anything that has one of these little black dots is a required field. You have to fill something out on that. If there's not, so like we're quadrant right here, there's no dot, you don't have to put anything in there. So if you don't know, don't worry about it. So here's how I tell you to fill out this form. So this is the next 6 pages that we've got in here is the residential listing input form. Anything that has a dot, you should know the answer to. So if you don't, then go figure it out. If you do, then put it in. If there's no dot, so like unit number here, no dot, I don't have to put anything. So just know when you're filling this out, anything with a dot, you should know. And if you don't, go figure it out. And if there's no dot, it's okay to leave it blank if you don't know, okay? So just, I'm gonna kind of just scroll through this. If you have questions on anything, stop me. I'm gonna talk about a few things where people usually do have questions. But so this.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Do you fill this out and the form on the MLS?
Oh, great question. So here's how I usually do it. Thank you for asking. I usually go to the MLS and fill it out and then print out. After I've filled it out, I print it. And so if I was going out on the appointment, I would print it and take it with me, even though I might not have it. I might have missed some of those boxes that I'm saying are required. I'll fill it out as best as I can first. Then I would go out and meet with them and finish filling it out. So you can do it either way, I guess, is really the answer. You can either print it and just take it blank and fill it out there. I usually try to fill it out first. And the reason being is I like to get it filled out in the MLS so that then once it's all done, the office can just hit publish and bam, it's on the MLS. So yeah, great question. But you can do it either way. My preference is fill it out on the MLS first. So.
But do both.
Yeah, I'll print it. Well, so yeah, great. Another point. So for me, if for some reason I guess, yeah, the answer is yes. I always print it out because when I go out on the appointment, I want to be able to verify what I've done.
Okay.
But there are probably some people that maybe wouldn't. If you're just going to send it to them to sign through .loop, you might not print it off. I usually still do those. So personal preference. So yeah, good point.
Thank
I
you.
usually do both. All right, so you're going to just check whatever the property type is, whatever the style is, put in your year build, what the parking capacity, all of these things. And again, just if there's a dot, you got to put something in there. If there's not, you don't. I'm going to stop on this one for a second to explain a couple things. So here's where you're going to put down a breakdown of the square footage per level. So each of the levels, you'll put how much square footage is, how many bedrooms, check the box for where the master bedroom is, how many bathrooms on each of the level, and how many are full, 3/4 or half, where a family room is, the den, formal living, the kitchen. So let me explain these because a lot of times newer agents don't know this. This is where's the dining? Is it in the kitchen? Is there a snack bar or an island bar is what the B is. F is for formal dining and S would be a semi-formal dining. Okay? And then what level the laundry room is and how many fireplaces on each of the levels. HOA information, you have to check either yes or no. If you check the no, then the HOA contact is not required, even though it says it's required on here. If you check no, it will not be required. If you check yes, it is required. Then the next of these is just check boxes. So for for the HOA, what's included, is there a pool, all of these things. You're just gonna go through and check the boxes that apply on those. And then down here is where we're gonna put in what the listing date is, the expiration date, your owner type, how to contact you for showings, what the listing type is, if it's EAL or ERS. So that usually is a question, so let me explain that. EAL is an exclusive agency listing, which an exclusive agency listing means only you can sell the property. You're the only one that could do it. So are you trying to see where I'm at? So, yeah, right there, right where you're cutting this, right there. Yep. So EAL is exclusive agency listing. ERS is exclusive right to sell, which is the form we just went through, which says you get paid no matter who brings the buyer. But the EAL is saying you're the only one that can bring a buyer. Nobody else can. Okay. All right. Let's see what else on here. If you see any others that you have questions on, the other one that usually people have questions on is this dual or variable rate right here. And what that is so you have to check yes or no. Dual or variable is, so think of it this way. So we just talked about that exclusive agency listing, which this doesn't really apply. Or the exclusive agency doesn't apply to what I'm going to say now. But let's say that I said to the seller, we're going to do the exclusive right to sell, which is what you're going to do 99.9% of the time. Like, I don't know if I've ever done an EAL, but I know one agent who would say to the seller, okay, if I end up representing both sides, I'll only charge you 5% commission. But if there's another agent involved, then we're going to do a 6%. Well, in that scenario, you would need to disclose on here that that would be, yes, a dual or a variable rate commission. So I don't recommend that, but that's just usually how I explain it. I do know one agent who does that, or he's passed away now, but he did for a long time. He would always say to his sellers, if I represent the buyer, I'm only going to charge you 5, but if another agent brings it, it'll be 6. So he had to check yes on that all the time. So if you ever see that on the MLS, that's kind of an indication. If you get into a multiple offer scenario, the question you need to ask the other agent is, if they've got dual or variable rate, is, are you representing one of the buyers on this multiple offer scenario? Because if they are, you now know their offer could be exactly equal on purchase price, but because of the dual variable rate, the seller's going to choose theirs because it's going to net the seller more money. All right. Compensation being offered is where you're going to put in the 4% or 3% or whatever percent, 3.5%. And then it's based on either gross or net. So let me explain gross and net. Gross means that the commission will be calculated on the purchase price. If you see net, what it means is the purchase price less any seller paid concessions. So let me just give you an example. Let's say it was a $300,000 purchase price with $10,000 paid in closing costs. On gross, if you checked the gross box, the commission is based on $300,000. If we checked the net box, your commission is based on $290. Make sense? So I always just do gross personally. I just feel like that it's how it should be, but personal preference. So you can decide either way. All right, listing agent information you're going to put in there. And then the rest of these pages are all check boxes. So I'm going to scroll through here, and here's how I do it. For these check boxes, when I take that form out to meet with the seller, I always just say to them, take a look at this. I do my best to fill it out and check the boxes correctly, but I always just tell the seller there. So I'm looking at page, Aaron, for you, pages 4, 6, 5, and 6. So I just tell the seller, look through and see what I missed. And notice how I worded that. Look through and see what I missed. Because I always just assume I'm going to miss something because I pretty much do every time. So I just tell the seller, look through and see what I missed. And then they'll look through and they'll usually be like, oh, we have a walk-in closet. Great, check the box. And then I just have them check the box. Okay. So for those 2 pages, let me scroll here. I just am going through these and just checking off everything that applies. And then I have the seller just double check me because I guarantee I missed something. Okay. Then this page here. So let me explain how I work this page. On this page here, which is the remarks section, when I get to the remarks section, I always say to the seller, what do you want to make sure that we highlight in the remarks section about your home? And then they tell me what they want me to make sure I put in there. And then I either write it down, or I'll even hand them the paper and say, just write down how you would want the remarks worded. Now, the reason I do that, where I got this idea from, was what happened is I would list a property, I would go put it on the MLS, the seller would then pull it up on the MLS, and after they pulled it up on the MLS, they would call me and go, hey, you forgot to mention blah, blah, blah. And I just got tired of people calling me and saying, you forgot to mention blah, blah, blah. And so my way around that is I always say to them, what do you want to make sure that we mention that people know about in the public remarks section? And then essentially they end up writing the remarks for you. And then what I found is you post it on there and then you call them and you say, hey, how did the MLS, did you pull it up and look on the internet? Yep. How did it look? Oh, it looked great, is what I found, because they usually were the ones who worded it. But if it didn't look great, here's what that would usually happen, is they would say to me, I forgot to tell you to put this in the remarks section. See, it was their fault now, not mine. So that's how I usually handle that public remarks section. The agent remarks is going to be just if there's information that you only want agents to know, you'll put it in the agent remarks. So not very often are you going to put stuff in there, but occasionally you might have something like a security code or a the key to the whatever, some closet or something where it's at. I mean, just if there's something that you want the agent to know, but not the whole public to go online and see, you'll put it in the agent remarks. This directions and non-standard address stuff, you're probably not going to use that too much anymore because we all have a GPS on our phone now. But back in the day, before that, you would use this to explain how to find it. Now, I actually listed a cabin about 1.5 years ago, maybe 2 years ago now, something like that, that the GPS was wrong. If you followed what the GPS said, it would have driven you to the wrong cabin. It was close, but it was wrong. So I then did fill out this directions, non-standard address stuff to explain how to find the property. That's what you would use that for. Exclusion remarks would be like I was telling you before, if you were going to be excluding the shelf or something, that's where you would put it. But again, for me, I just recommend they get it out so you don't have to put anything in there in terms of exclusion. So, and then HOA remarks would be just anything you want them to know about the HOA is you would put in there. And then you're going to have the seller sign it. All right. Any questions? In the chat box, put yes or no if you have a question. And this is another check of if you're paying attention. So yes or no. And I'm not looking at the chat box, so if you put yes, unmute yourself and tell me. All right, good job, guys. All right, here we go. Next then is the seller disclosures. Now, here's the key on this. I apologize, I know we're 1.5 hours into it. It's hard when you're not sitting here in the room with me. Aaron's got all kinds of energy. You guys at home are probably bored, but we're having fun here in this room. All right, on the seller disclosures. When we get to seller disclosures, here's how I handle it. I tell the sellers, of every form you're going to fill out, this one is the most important form of everything we're going to do. Now, here's why. The reason for that is because and I tell the seller this, if you end up in court, this document is going to be the one that either sets you free or hangs you. This document is either going to hang you in court or it is going to be the reason you get out of court and win. This document is the most important you're going to fill out. Now, you'll notice there in that section there that there is a notice from the company. So let me scroll up a little bit here. Well, actually first, you're going to put the seller's name there, the property address, and then it's got Everest in it. This notice from the company is telling them we are trained in the marketing of real estate, that we're not, again, tax, property inspectors, CPAs, all that kind of stuff. This section here is the instructions for the seller. And again, that section is where I'm just telling you, this is where you're either going to love that you filled these out properly, or you're going to wish you had. And then I just tell them this. Go through and fill this out and disclose everything you know about the property. Don't be worried about checking a yes. Don't feel like you need to put no on everything. Putting yes is actually a good thing, because anything that you check yes on in here, now I don't always get this detailed with them, but I want you guys to understand. Anything that they check yes on in here, puts all the responsibility on the buyer. Meaning, so this first, well, I won't use the first one here. Let's go over, let me scroll down here. I'm going to go to, well, we'll use section 2 here, this additions and remodels. With the addition of cosmetic upgrades to the property, have you remodeled, made any room additions, or made structural modifications? If they say yes, anything they check yes for, they need to then describe or disclose. But that also, if you ended up in court, a judge would look at it and say, well, they told you in section 2 they have made this change. Did you not check it out? Why wouldn't you check it out? So that's where you want to keep in mind. Same thing on, I usually use roof. Are you aware of any past or present leaks in the roof? If they are, so like in my own personal house, when they finished it, there's one section they just didn't put enough tar. And after we had lived there for, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 years, the little bit of tar they had put there wore down, and all of a sudden I noticed a leak in the house. Well, I went and put some more tar. I've never had a problem since. Well, when it comes time for me to sell my property, most sellers would look at that and go, well, we fixed it and it's been 10 years or whatever. No. Problem is, if they then find out there was some problem that you weren't aware of as the seller, they sue you over that, you're now going to wish you had said yes. So for me, when I'm selling my house, I'm going to check yes. And I'm going to just explain what happened. That now puts the onus on the buyer to check it out if they're concerned. Meaning if that spot leaks in the roof, a judge would look at it if they tried to take me to court and say, well, they told you there had been a leak. Did you not check it out? So it puts it all on them. That's why I say this is the most important for the seller. All right. Here's the next question. So they're going to go through and fill it out, check out whatever they know. Anything they check yes to, they need to put an explanation to. If there's not enough room, say on this line here to explain it, there is an addendum to the list, to the seller disclosures that they would use, okay? Now, they go through, they're filling all of this out. The question for you guys, though, is should you ever fill this out for the seller? This could be a trick question.
No.
Okay, so Tim, since you said no, I got a question for you.
No, wait a second. Wait. Yes. Yes.
Okay, since you said yes, I have a question for you.
Either way, huh?
Well, yeah, because if you said yes, you're wrong.
Okay.
So let's say, though, you go out and it's a little old lady. She's 90 years old. And she just says, but Tim, I can't see to fill out this form. Can you just do it? Can you read it to me and I'll answer and you check the boxes? Do you ever do that?
I won't now.
Okay, good. The answer is no. Don't ever do that. Because this sweet little old lady all of a sudden will turn into something not so sweet if something goes wrong. She'll say, no, I told him yes. He just checked no. So we don't ever fill it out. So if you come across this little old 90-year-old lady that's so cute and you just feel so bad for her, get her to get a neighbor to do it, get her to get one of her kids to do it, a grandkid, anybody do it but you. Don't ever fill this out, okay? All right. Last piece on this then is two things. Square footage, this is the spot I told you they have to disclose to the buyer where they got the square footage from, which is typically from you, but where you got it from, they're going to check the box here. And then down here is they're going to check that they either is or is not a foreign person. And then down here, they're going to verify the information by signing it. The buyer signs this just to acknowledge receipt. Now, you'll from time to time have a buyer that says to you, hey, I don't want to sign this because what if I don't agree with it? They're not agreeing with it by signing it. All they're doing by signing is acknowledging that they got a receipt. So notice, just point out to them, it says acknowledgement of receipt. Doesn't say acceptance of what the seller said. And then there's a disclosure form update section. So for this, the seller, if it's possible you list a property, they fill out the seller disclosures, and then 2 days later that roof leaks. Well, sometimes the seller might think, whoo, glad that leaked after I filled out the seller disclosure. But the truth is, if anything has changed, they need to update it. So typically I will have the seller fill it out right when I list the property. I will give them, like, that's their homework assignment. I don't sit there while they do it even. I just say, fill this out and I'll get it from you later. Or I send it to them in .loop to fill out in .loop. Once we get an offer, before you send the seller disclosure to the buyers, it's good to go back to your seller and say, do you need to update anything? Has anything changed? And then they're either going to check the box that there are no changes and they sign it, or they check the box that there are changes and put whatever updates and then sign it. So we need to get them to update it. All right, and then here is the addendum to the seller's property condition disclosure. So if they needed to use that, they would fill this out. And you can see they would just put the page number and item number and what the explanation was. And then sign it, and the buyer acknowledges again. Any questions on seller disclosures before we hit the wire fraud form? All right. Next, wire fraud alert disclosure. So on this one, we're going to have every seller sign this. And with the seller, not as important on the seller side as the buyer side, but could come into play still with the seller, which is why we make them sign it. If for some reason they're going to have to wire funds to the title company, they need to be aware, don't trust an email that shows up saying, here's the wire funds. They need to verify and check it. What is happening is people are intercepting transactions, figuring out who's on the buyer side and the seller side, and then they will send an email as if it's coming from the title company saying, our wire instructions have changed, wire your money to this place instead. And then they go wire the money and it goes to some fraudulent person and the transaction falls apart, the buyer loses their money. So have your seller sign this and just explain to them, do not trust any wire instructions that come by email. If somebody says, I would even just tell them, if somebody even calls you and tells you the wire instructions have changed, call and verify with me before, and then I'll verify with the title company. So don't just trust anything, okay? So we're going to have them sign that. Next is the affiliated business arrangement disclosure. This form is just required and not so crucial again on the seller side right now, but will come into play down the road for us. So we've added it to the seller packet already. Is we have to disclose to them that Inspiro Financial is a sister company to Everest. And down the road, we'll have a sister mortgage or title company as well that'll get added to this, but we don't have them yet. So right now, this form's really more just for a buyer, but we're using it and requiring it for the seller because down the road, we will add the title to it. And basically what it says, and you can see it's bold, you are not required to use the listed provider as a conditional for settlement on your loan or purchase, sale, or refinance. There are frequently other settlement service providers with similar services, and you're free to shop around. So this is not saying they have to use it. We just have to disclose we have an interest that it's a sister company. All right. Last, but definitely not least, is lead-based paint disclosure. In the chat box, I'm going to have you do 2 more chat box things, and then we're done. In the chat box, and I'll pull it up so I can see what you put. You have to use this if the property was built in 1978. Is that true or false?
True.
Throw out the chat box. True or false? If the property was built in 1978, do we need to use lead-based paint disclosure? I've got a bunch of trues and 1 false. The false is the correct answer. We need it prior to 1978. So if the property was built in 78, we don't need it. Prior to 78, then yes, we do need it. So I tricked you there. But would it hurt if you did it in 1978? No. In fact, I've done a lot of bank-owned foreclosure properties, and on those ones, they do it if the property was built in 2019. They would still use the lead-based paint disclosure. So just know it's okay to use it, but it's not required unless it's prior to 78. So 1977 or older. All right. Now, here's how we do it. What we're going to do, and we'll talk more about this on the buyer side as well. So I'm going to only talk the seller side of this, and then when we do the buyer packet, I'll talk the buyer side. You're going to put in the address of the property. Now, you'll notice it's got a checked box there. I'm not doing too much talking. My voice is going. All right. There's a checkbox there, but we do not use a checkbox. So I put it there as a do not do this, which is not true. I don't know why I ended up with a checkbox, but you want to have them initial it. So there, and notice it says initials will be completed on printed form. So you're going to have them initial that they either know of lead-based paint or they have no knowledge. So either they're going to initial 2A1 or 2A2. That's it. On 2B, they're going to initial that they have provided reports that they have about lead-based paint or that they have none. So they're going to initial these on either they have knowledge and no reports, or they have knowledge and have reports, or they have no knowledge and no reports. Because if they have knowledge, they should not provide reports, right? All right. Then the buyer will take care of section 3. You as the listing agent need to initial section 4 that you've informed the seller that they have to disclose that. And then everybody gets to sign this form. Buyers, sellers, both agents. Okay? All right. What questions?
Hey, Russ,
Yeah.
question going back to selling and listing.
Okay.
Previously, I had seen houses that had signs that said coming soon,
Correct.
going to be listed soon.
Yep.
I heard that we're no longer allowed to do that. Is that correct?
Yes. So what the
Because I just
MLS
saw one yesterday as well.
Oh, did you? Yeah. So I would say report it to the MLS then when you see those. But yeah, what had happened was it used to be that you could list a property and it didn't have to be on the MLS for 5 business days. And they've changed it now to saying it's got to be on within 1 business day. So so I guess you technically could do a coming soon for 1 day, but that's it. Like you'd have to put it up first thing in the morning, coming soon, and put it on the MLS the next day. And so, yeah, I think there are, Sean, a lot of people trying to do that, but they should not be doing that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Yep. All right. Last thing for you guys then. Put in the chat box, Russ is the best teacher ever. I'm just kidding. You don't have to put anything else in there. Thanks for being here. So what we will do is, so next Tuesday is the REPSI with Rob class. So it'll be the same concept. If you want to come be here in person, we've got it set up to where you can be 6 feet apart. And we can have up to 12 people is how I've got it set up. Recommended that you bring a mask and wear one. I have my mask here. So in fact, I'll end this screen share for you. Had my mask here in case there was 12 of you here, I was gonna wear it. But Aaron came and I was like, yeah, I don't care if I infect you. I'm just kidding, joking, totally. So anyway, if you want to be here, you can. Otherwise, you can do the Zoom through the end of June and still get credit, and then we'll see what happens after that. But thanks for being here, guys. Do remember, though, for Tuesday, I'm going to need license number 1 of the times for 1 of the 6 classes so that I can give you credit. So anyway, thanks for being here, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Russ.
You are welcome. Thanks for being here.
Russ, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Hey, if we've already given you our license number at some point, like in the last couple months, do you want it again or no?
Yeah, if you'll get it from, because I don't know that I have it, do I? Did you give it to me?
Yeah, but it was back when we were signing in on paper.
Oh, yeah, give it. Yeah, if you'll just put it, just 1 of the times, just give it to me so I can just have it. It just makes it easier for me to not have to.
All right.
So.
All right. Thanks, Russ.
Yeah, thank you. See you.
See ya.